Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast. We've got a great one for you today. We'll be speaking with Joan Trice, CEO of Allterra Group, and Jonathan Miller of Miller Samuel. Miller Samuel is a real estate firm in New York, an appraiser, professor, and more. We'll be discussing the state of the profession and what the future holds for appraisers. Joan?
Thank you, Jim, and welcome, Jonathan. And by the way, you look like the new skinny version of Jonathan Miller.
Well, let's just say that consistent with my theme of being contrarian, I actually lost about 25 pounds during the lockdown, which seems to be counter to the trend.
Yes,
so
while the rest
happy about that.
Got a little chunky. Yes. Well, that's impressive. So we have a big topic today, and you're not shy. So it's a real pleasure to have you on board with us. And so let's talk about kind of the state of the appraisal profession, but specifically, let's start with the regulatory structure and the oversight of the appraisal profession. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think the regulatory structure has become a giant sort of self-serving bureaucracy. I write a lot about this in my weekly newsletter. I have an Appraiserville section of my newsletter. It's called, the newsletter is called Housing Notes, and it comes out every Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. And I don't really have an axe to grind in a personal matter. You can see that, I've been at the appraisal thing for 34 years, and you can just see that the largesse of bureaucracy has really mushroomed, and it is actually beginning to work really against the appraisers themselves, that there's so much bureaucracy that's really unnecessary. Appraising, as a good friend of mine once told me, apparently is not rocket science. I mean, it's Yeah, but it's regulated like it is, and I think that's a problem. And then the other big aspect to the regulatory challenge is that it's the same people in charge that have been in charge for decades. And so I think what happens is when you have sort of one or two people that are always there, nothing ever changes, but they're able to sort of provide it's akin to checking a list, that say, hey, we addressed this, we addressed diversity. So, the committee's run by a middle-aged white person. Like we have these weird sort of things that, to the appraiser in the trenches right now is really busy. There's no help. There's no thinking about what they're going through. It's all about sort of preservation of this system, which is frankly wildly out of date and out of touch with what appraisers really go through every day. So
I'm watching that with interest as well. And so let's talk about the barriers to entry. That is the problem. I mean, we've been talking about a shortage of appraisers for 10 years, yet we currently have no demographic study to analyze just how bad it might be, when is the cliff, and then more importantly, what's the fix? I mean, I haven't heard or seen anybody with a rational, PAREA is even a separent topic perhaps.
But PAREA is an attempt to try to bridge the gap, and it has some merits, but really, when I think about the problem with this profession is you basically have to be an indentured servant for 2 years, and it's a perfect storm. So you have to be an indentured servant for 2 years, which, so, we can handle, you can handle that, except for the part where we also have, sort of fee compression coming from, third-party institutions. And so there's no wiggle room. The average appraiser doesn't have the ability to bring on new staff or, in the same way that they could, because there's no financial margin of error like there had been. And so what ends up happening is we're aging. The average appraiser, I think I'm sort of the median age of what an appraiser is. And And last time I checked, every year I get a little bit older. And I think that's the way the profession is right now. So we have to remove these barriers, that people can do appraisals and be something, not a fully certified appraiser. Part of the problem is that the lending community, and this is against what, Fannie and Freddie have been arguing, that they're perfectly fine taking a trainees signing appraisals. But most lenders we deal with don't want that, sort of as an aftermath of the financial crisis. So we're sort of in this weird netherland of being stuck. It's very difficult to expand your business as an appraiser. I know my own practice, we're very strong. We're Manhattan based. Right now, we're very strong, and it's virtually impossible to find anybody experienced because anybody who's experienced is very busy too.
Yeah.
And so you bring in a trainee, it takes you 2 years before they can really sign off on reports for banks for the most part.
So yeah, it's an
impractical
economic problem.
The economics is what drives it, right?
Yeah, both the trainee can't earn enough money to support themselves in the business, and you as a company owner, it isn't profitable for you either to take on a trainee because they can't work independently. Right.
It's exactly right. And then the other thing, I think that's why I've been so vocal in my newsletters about, our largest trade group, our regulatory body. There's so much sort of, the inability to look at, the residential appraisal problem, as I've just described, and actually do something proactive about it. Everybody's just sort of like going through the motions and not really like, ripping off their jacket and, sitting down and like resolving it. It's all like this political sort of juggling that's going on that's incredibly distracted from actually solving the problems.
A problem. Yeah. No, I agree with you. So let's do this. Let's take a break for a commercial message. And when we come right back, we'll pick up where we left off.
Thanks, Joan. Appraisers, if you've grown frustrated with endlessly pursuing new appraisal work and not reaping any of the benefits, Metro West is here to help. They understand and work to alleviate the pain points commonly felt by appraisers to enable personal and financial growth for their staff. After all, they've been owned and operated by appraisers since the company opened in 1987. Metro West Appraisal is an equal opportunity employer, and they're always looking for certified residential real estate appraisers to join their team. Visit metrowestappr.com/careers or email careers@metrowestappr.com. Joan, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. So, Jonathan, I always, when I criticize a structure, it's so easy to criticize. I always like to take time to propose solutions. So, if you were in charge, what would you propose as the solution to attract not only just more people into the profession, but also minorities and women in particular?
Right. So just to, I will get into that, but just to sort of back up for a second, one of the things I feel like I've become a professional complainer when it comes to our profession.
Well, it's easy now.
It's very easy. And I think part of that is the point. It's too easy because there are real problems. And, but I think part of this has been, over the last 4 or 5 years, I think there's been a groundswell of concern, against actions of various leading groups in the profession. Like I described earlier, we're a profession of, I call lone wolves, sort of, working on our own and, and doing our own thing. And then occasionally, getting together for appraisal meetings, with your local chapter or whatever. We're in a world where, like, if you're designated, if you say anything against the organization they have to be designated, then you're punished. And that punishment could be economic damage, besides just sort of public humiliation. And so people don't say anything. So we've got this culture in our industry of not complaining, not bringing things up. And so I think half the problem has been just being able to articulate the problems and having everybody really understand it, and you have loyalists that, to certain organizations that will just go after you personally because you're criticizing. You have all this like insanity when all the people that are talking louder than others really just want for appraisers to be able to do what they need to do and have wherever they're paying their dues, have those organizations actually work on their behalf and not sort of checklists. So I think that's really important to get that out. In terms of like, what are some things that we should do? Like,
I mean, how can we attract the next generation into the profession with a particular emphasis on minorities and women?
Right. Well, the number one thing is, I believe that, this is a top-down problem. And so, for example, when you think about the Appraisal Foundation, for 30 years, the Appraisal Qualifications Board, a technical board, which basically determines the qualifications to enter the profession, has not had an African American on the board until 2021. So over 3 decades. And only 3 women, right? So like, here's the organization that is setting the framework for the entry, meaning a licensed or certified appraiser. And there's no understanding of this was the position that they had maintained for over 3 decades without external people criticizing and saying, hey, this is what you have to do. And so I think what this really involves, and I'm not being critical of people that are, very active and very passionate about being in, active in various organizations like the Appraisal Foundation, Appraisal Institute, et cetera. But you can't just sit there when you see something wrong. Once you're aware of it's wrong, do something about it. And what I think has to happen is, so I think we need a real change or a makeover in, who's representing the appraisers on a national level. And I think if that isn't done immediately, then this problem never gets addressed. And that's a super macro solution. It's easy to say, but I think it's pretty straightforward and simple. It is that the messaging and the understanding, if you aren't aware of the problem, and the Appraisal Foundation has not been aware of the problem until the last year, then you can't solve the problem, that's my point. And as a result, by doing nothing and sort of throwing, solutions like, hey, let's create a diversity committee or commission. The problem with that stuff is then what you have now is you have like 3 or 4 news events which says, hey, this appraiser appraised low because it was an African American. All kinds of things being inferred about the individual appraiser on the ground, when really this should be an issue talked about in the leadership echelon in terms of, because what do we want after all this? We want to set policy. We want to steer the ship in the right course. I love being an appraiser. I love the profession. Some people sort of kid me about that. I love it. I just want it to last.
You want it to be healthy and sustainable, and
I think sustainable is the operative word. Sustainable, and it's not at the current trajectory, just because there's no leadership anywhere, in my view. There certainly are leaders, but generally it is, we're sort of like our own worst enemy as an industry, is the way I look at it.
No, I think we've been accused of that for a long time.
Sure.
Too. There's no doubt about it. So here's one of the things that the CRN is looking at. What do you think about just removing the supervisory 2,000 hours? I mean, there are other professions like CPAs where you get your education, you pass an exam, and you're issued a credential. And that doesn't mean that you're qualified to go do an audit of a large company or do a tax return. But now that you have your credential, you are hireable, you're employable, and you can go get your experience with a CPA firm.
Right. I mean, that's what the accountants do, right? I mean, like you're saying, and that works fine. And conceptually, those are the sorts of things that should be employed or should be talked about, because that's real. I mean, the idea that you have to basically not make a living for 2 years eliminates many people from the, let the market dictate what your fees are. In other words, if you're brand new and fresh, if that's translated to the consumer or the customer versus somebody who's been at it for 34 years, there's some filtering in the real world that actually takes place that we just say, oh, you got to sit still for 2 years. I mean, I have a couple trainees in my company, and I can tell you that they're far better appraisers, and they don't have their 2 years. They're far better appraisers than the people I go up with, that are MAIs on doing residential appraisals that I go up. I do a lot of court testimony, and these people would be much better. If they were on the stand. They don't have the credential to do that, but just in terms of sheer knowledge, I think we're making this sort of brushstroke argument, and it's a result of the regulatory largesse that has been sort of evolved over the last 3 decades. There's nothing proven here that says, hey, this is the right way to do it. It's just something that sort of evolved over time, and it became the rule. And we all sort of rely on it, but we don't really ever ask, why are we doing this? And we should be asking that every freaking day.
Yeah, well, and it's so easy just to look at other professions who have credentials, and how do they go about it? And they have sustainable professions.
But I think one of the reasons why we haven't had that change or that thinking is because it's the same people in charge, the same sort of group. You and I are in, presumably that same age demo, but we don't think that way. But, in terms of presuming, hey, this is how I did it, and so therefore this is the right way to do it. And it's like hazing at a fraternity or something,
right. I had to suffer through it.
Right. So
the rest of you are gonna too. Right.
Right. Or the medical intern that, has to work 36-hour in a row shifts, and no one's going to change that because the doctors that are around them all did that, and it, proves your mettle. I mean, come on. And that's what we're, like I said, this isn't rocket science. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily an easy profession. It's not, but it isn't rocket science. And I think, we've been used to doing things for so long the same way that we need to shake things up pretty quickly and pretty severely. And we can't do that with the same people in charge.
Same regime. I agree with you. So let's break for a few more minutes, Jonathan, and we will be right back after this message.
Appraisers, stop waiting 30+ days to get paid on your appraisal invoices. Cicady Capital is a simple and secure payment platform that improves your cash flow and reduces time that you have to spend on paperwork and making collection calls. The process is simple. After the initial setup, simply submit your invoices to Cicady Capital instead of your AMC or lender. You'll receive payment the next business day, while Cicady Capital collects the payment from your AMC or lender. For additional questions or to set up your account, call Cicady Capital Support Team at 208-953-7234, 208-953-7234, or email them at support@cicady.com, SEKADY.com. Joan, back to you.
Thank you. So, Jonathan, let's assume for a minute we don't have just all of us old timers listening to this podcast, and maybe we have some.
Joan, I wasn't referring to you as an old timer.
Oh, that's all right. I own it. Let's assume we might have some trainees listening, or even those who are considering joining the profession. So instead of, we've been talking about all the downsides. So what's the upside? What do you look into the future? What are you hopeful about?
Well, I think appraisers, there's tremendous niche business out there because Manhattan is this weird sort of oddball housing market. But just to give you some thoughts, when we first started, 34, actually it's going on 35 years ago, kind of scary. We were all, lenders, mortgage brokers. That business was easy to get. And then what we discovered was you could actually develop niche opportunities by coming up with methodologies or, solutions to valuation challenges that no one had thought of before. And then it becomes a cottage industry. And I'll give you an example. And this isn't necessary for somebody, in the Midwest who's doing an appraisal to run out and do, but I'm just saying, you want to rethink what you're actually doing in the business and things that come up. And I'll give you an example. We appraise hallway space, in a condo or co-op. The person at the end of the hall is going to buy the apartment across the hall, and they want to combine them into one apartment. It's not market value because you're on the 8th floor at the end of the hallway, and someone on the 4th floor is going to say, boy, I'd really like to have a piece of that 8th floor hallway, right? There's no market for it, but it is a value and use exercise. And so we do a ton of co-op and condo, or work for co-op and condo boards, value and hallway space, allocating shares.
I mean, that's a thing.
Oh, it's a big thing.
That is the most bizarre niche.
I'd like to brag that I'm probably the most qualified appraiser of dumbwaiters in the country. Only because
that's on your resume. Yeah.
It should be. It isn't, but it should be. Yeah. But my point is that there are niche businesses or business opportunities in the profession that we're sort of programmed to sort of think of it as the same, let's do a residential appraisal, this ranch on a cul-de-sac, and here's 4 or 5 comps on the grid, and here's an addendum. And, that's a thing. But there's a tremendous amount of work available outside of that. The other thing is that, and this is something that I find sort of amazing, is most of my peers, or a lot of my peers, are wary and afraid of court testimony. And it is a niche like you can't believe.
And it's fun for those.
It's like playing chess.
Yeah.
In the sense that, you only answer, it actually makes you a better appraiser, because then you can actually see how people are actually reading your report and throttling you with questions. It becomes very humbling, but in a good way. It takes like a half a dozen testimony experiences to numb you from the nervousness. I've done, I do a lot of it, and I really enjoy it. Last year, I testified 7 full days in a case, which is the outlier. That's not the norm on a 10-year litigation. But It's tremendously lucrative, and it's all on you. Like there's no underwriter.
Right.
It's like, and you're defending your report. You're not going to jail. That's the way you have to be confident and be able to speak about your report. That's a simple thing. And then the other is just, other types of, I just think, for lack of a better way to put it, is look at your book of business. And the first thing you should do is look and say, hey, 95% of my business is bank related. I call it interest rate work, whether it's refi or purchase. Our business is about 1/3 bank and 2/3 private, meaning anything but bank. And guess what? The non-bank work is wildly more lucrative. I mean, it's probably double, and it's the same effort. So like, apply some critical thinking to your own practice. I'll bet you there's some things in there that you don't even realize. That's a good topic of conversation among your colleagues at a chapter meeting or whatever, when we start getting back to normal life. I would always be asking that question, because I think we're so used to waiting for the phone to ring or the fax machine, to date myself, to buzz in with a new order, that we don't look at like what other opportunities we can create. And I think there's a lot out there, especially as we go further down the road with automation. I think that as we, there's always you're going to have sort of the generic, sort of the interest rate related, the AVM supplemented, whatever, you're going to have all this other stuff. But in the private world, there's a lot more depth to the opportunity.
Well, and there's a recognition of the value of an expert.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, that is what has been sullied in the residential housing finance space.
Agreed.
Is that the appraiser is not getting recognition as the local market expert. And
we're a robot. We're a robot, and we're here to fill out your order.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
after the financial crisis, during the financial crisis, we were we essentially were deal enablers as a
Yeah.
profession. And if you weren't a deal enabler, you're a deal killer, right? And
Right.
who wants that? I
Yeah.
don't want that, and
Yeah.
most of my peers don't want that. So why do that?
Yeah. No, it's an unfortunate and here we are in that kind of market again.
I can just one other thing that I would encourage appraisers to do, and probably if there's one single thing you could do to help your practice, it would be to embrace public speaking. And what I mean by that is, appraisers out there should be speaking to their local realtor boards, their legal community. They should be out there and do it for free. My wife
Join the
always
Chamber of
teases me,
Commerce. Yeah.
do all that stuff.
Everybody. Yeah.
And so that when the word appraiser pops up, you're associated with it. And that's not like you do it for a couple of months and then see what happens. You embed it into the time, your work time. That is part of your schedule.
Marketing, right? Yourself.
Part of marketing.
Your business.
I don't think as a profession, I don't think we're so good at marketing. And so I would really encourage, if you're doing some of that now, double or triple it, like do a lot more.
Right.
And especially now, think about who better to talk about the housing market than an appraiser who's, for a living, in theory, provides a neutral benchmark for someone to make an informed decision on. Real estate broker, some, really know the market better than I ever could in an area that I might appraise, but they still are tainted in the sense that, they're still getting a commission if the property sells. So market yourself as this neutral. You're not an apologist for the market. If the market's going down, you have no problem with telling that it goes down. If the market's going up, you tell them it goes up. You're the arbiter of neutral information as opposed to sort of making everybody feel good. And I found that during down times, when you seem to be one of the few negative voices in the room, but not without like hope or providing them useful information so that they can navigate the challenges. But then when things are better, what you're saying, well, everybody else is saying, but yours is much more credible. And it's credible because when things are bad, you explain why they were and how to sort of navigate it. And I think that's something, there's a lot of herd mentality in real estate. And I think it's always better to be the one that gets heard is my feeling.
I agree. No pun on the herd.
Right.
That was pretty good, Jonathan. We have lots to talk about, so we want to invite you back in the future, and we'll find some other topics. I really, really appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure, Joan.
Thank you.
Joan and Jonathan, thank you for such a great discussion, and thanks for our listeners for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the episode and look forward to the next one. If you have an idea for a future Buzzcast or would like to be interviewed, reach out to us, info@appraisalbuzz.com. If you're not already a subscriber, be sure to go to appraisalbuzz.com and hit the subscribe for the news and reminders on all the great programs we have in the works. Thanks so much, guys. In uncertain times, you need a certain partner. You don't have to sacrifice top-notch coverage for an affordable premium. Intercorp has all the options and is sure to have just the right one to fit your specific needs. They provide the appraisal profession with competitive, best-in-class E&O coverage solutions nationwide. Having served the insurance needs of the industry for more than 25 years, Intercorp understands the risks you face every day. Whether you're an individual appraiser, appraisal firm, residential, commercial, or an AMC, visit intercorpinc.net to get a competitive quote today.